Hey guys, Eddie back with Couch Talk. Welcome back to the show. If it's your first time with me, welcome to the show. Guys, please hit like, please hit subscribe, turn your notifications on, and I promise if you stick with me, I will earn your viewership. Want to talk today about a more general topic, a more broad topic, and that is being open-minded, right? What a lot of us run into, I realized because I had this, I stumbled on it today as I was debating on online debate forums, which of course, I'm asking for it in the first place if I'm going to go to Facebook or Twitter to debate politics. But we got into some pretty semantic arguments, some pretty nuanced stuff, and it was almost like not even worth arguing. But one of the things that we stumbled on, one of the things that I was arguing was I made the claim that with regard to classified documents that President Donald Trump basically didn't ignore the grand jury subpoena, right? Everybody seems to think that Donald Trump just ignored the subpoena, right? Like he just, basically flipped off the FBI and said, forget it, I'm not going to comply. Well, that's not really what happened, right? What really happened is he was kind of belligerent, right? He made a lot of, he gave the FBI a hard time. He gave National Archives a hard time. He definitely kept on filing extensions and trying to assert executive privilege and then this, that, and the other. And then even after the subpoena, he invited him over to Mar-a-Lago and, had them pick up some stuff. But, of course, they had to come back. So then, one could say that perhaps he intentionally withheld documents. Perhaps he didn't, right? Perhaps he just didn't know they were there. It's very difficult to know the difference between those two. But the only claim I was making, I wasn't even claiming that Donald Trump wasn't breaking the law. I think he did. But I think it would be nearly impossible to prove it because of the nuance of him attempting to comply at one point. And the Supreme Court ruling on the matter is that there has to be basically malicious intent. So they would have to prove that Donald Trump knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that there were classified documents still in his possession after the FBI came the first time. Like, they would have to prove that he did in fact know that he had intentionally withheld classified documents and then refused to give them up, which culminated in that raid, which happened later, right? And that is a kind of a fine point that would be almost impossible to prove, right? Unless they basically have surveillance of him, looking at these documents and there's like a close shot, like a zoom in of a classified document and of Donald Trump going, they missed one. In that event, okay, yeah, then they would have proof. But until then, basically, most of the time, it wasn't even Trump dealing with it. It was his legal team dealing with it. So at the very worst, Donald Trump could probably just turn on his legal team eventually and cause them to fall on their swords for him. But I doubt that it's even going to come to that because I just don't think it's provable. So, but my claim was this. It was just that Donald Trump basically, maybe he had committed a crime, but he had done so intelligently enough to probably evade conviction. And that was it. That was all I was saying. That is, he probably won't be convicted. Partially because of who he is, but partially because of the way that he committed the crime, right? He didn't just, it wasn't like the FBI sent him a subpoena and Donald Trump was like, nah, I don't feel like it. No, he didn't ever do anything like that. He didn't ever ignore the subpoena. He didn't not respond to it. He sent responses. He sent legal responses, and he communicated through his legal team each and every time. Now, were all of these responses valid? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. But I think because of his attempts to comply, it will be impossible to convict. Also, there's an element of do we want to try to avoid the appearance of partiality, so we don't want to convict Donald Trump and indict him, but not do it to Biden while the situations aren't the exact same, there definitely are some similarities. There are some parallels. Not a lot, not a ton, but there are some, right? And so, but the big issue is this. So as I'm discussing this, and they're going back and forth, and they keep on giving me the 11th Circuit District ruling, and I'm like, guys, this doesn't mean anything. Because I'm not telling you that there weren't rulings to quash some of his legal responses. But as far as I know, there's still the question of whether or not he actually declassified these documents. He says maybe he did. I don't know if he did or not. Who knows? There isn't really evidence to support one way or the other than the fact that Donald Trump made that statement. So if he makes that statement, that's evidence. And then, but the big thing is this. After a while, after going back and forth, 15, 20, 30 times, and then someone else chiming in and me having to go back through all of my arguments again, I'm like, let me ask you this. Can we just set this aside and say, if Donald Trump gets convicted, I'll admit I was wrong. I'll say, hey, you're right. There was enough malicious intent provable to convict. And if he doesn't get convicted, will you afford me the same courtesy? Will you say, hey, you were right. Donald Trump just, he broke the law, but he did it intelligently enough to avoid conviction. And that was my only question to them, is like, what would it take for you to just admit that I basically, will set this argument aside, and if results bear out that I was correct, then say I was correct. And if results bear out that you were correct, I absolutely will do that for you. But at that point, every single one of them were like, well, just because he doesn't get convicted wouldn't mean that you're right. So basically, here's the problem. The problem is we go through these arguments, we go through these debates, and someone in the debate is so close-minded that they literally don't have a way to admit they're wrong. They don't have a way to evolve their thought. They basically have put themselves in this box that they're just going to ride out for eternity, and there's no way for them to ever get to a place where they can admit that they made a mistake and that the other person claiming the exact opposite has a result in their favor. There's no way to do it. And I think that's a fundamental problem in America, is because we get in these debates, and there are so many times where no one is willing to admit defeat. And I understand that, a lot of these arguments, they're very ego entrenching, right? They're just like something where you grip a hold of it, and then it feels like if you're wrong about that, it's like you're wrong about everything in life, and it feels bad, right? And I understand that you don't want to admit a political debate defeat. But in the face of obvious facts, there comes a time where you have to. And in every single one of these situations, right? I had another debate online the other day about the way we handled this air balloon situation, the China spy balloon. And I believe that we should have destroyed it literally 100 times between the time that it left China and the time that it passed over North Carolina and got into South Carolina and head out to sea to Myrtle Beach. We should have destroyed it 15 billion times before it got that far. And I'm not the only one that's saying that, right? It's not like I'm just pulling this off of Fox News from somebody who's armchairing this from the side. No, I'm ex-Navy. I have a ton of friends in the military, active duty personnel who are military strategists. I have friends that are literally counselors in this crisis. And they all tell me privately that yes, we should have destroyed it. That no, we did not handle this correctly. And there are tons of people on TV. I'm not talking about on Fox News, but of course there are some there too, and you can't just ignore those. I'm talking about on Redacted, I'm talking about, in Forbes, there's about 100 different places where there are military strategists who will say that we did not handle this properly. And the arguments I'm getting are like, well, Trump did it too. And I'm like, Trump's not in office right now. I'm critiquing the current event, the active event. And there's just no way that they can ever concede that something they believe in. Basically, they're all rallying to the defense of Biden because they're spitting out the same talking points that MSNBC does. And I'm like, guys, is it possible in your mind that Biden can do wrong? Does he make any mistakes? I know Trump makes mistakes, and I know Biden makes mistakes, and I know Clinton made mistakes, and I know Obama made mistakes, and Bush and Reagan, and so on. Everyone makes mistakes. And it's okay to admit that the person you like, the person you voted for, made mistakes. That is okay, right? There's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, you know what, he really could have handled that better. Yeah, you know, I'm not happy with a spy balloon being over our nation either. Yeah, you know, I'm not sure exactly where they should have shot it down, but there were with a 7-mile debris field, which is very, very, very generous. There are hundreds of places between Montana. By the way, Montana itself only has 30 people in it or something stupid. Obviously, I'm being hyperbolic, but that's not the point. Montana is exceedingly sparse, and there are tons of places in the raw wilderness where there is literally nobody around for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles, like 20-mile radius areas, 50-mile radius areas where there's one person in the entire 800 square mile zone. And yet we're just not willing to knock it down. We should have killed it. Canada should have shot it down. Over one of the places in Canada airspace where there wasn't anybody around. And there were plenty of places in Canada where there's nobody in that area, right? Where there's no population. There are a million different places where that air balloon should have been shot down. And this argument, it's miasmic. It's just we've gotten to the point where we just cannot admit a failure by the person that we align with, right? We've gotten in our tribe and we've gotten to the point where we just cannot admit any form of defeat, any form of, mea culpa, I was wrong, this was, you were right. We have got to get to the point as American people where we can admit that we were wrong. And if we can't get there, then guys, I fear for the future. In order for us to get past this two-party tribalism, in order for us to get past this identity politics tribalism, we have got to get to the point where we can acknowledge defeat, where we can acknowledge, you were right. I didn't want to admit it, but maybe you had it right all along. And if you can't think that, if you can't do that evolving form of thought, if you can't do that kind of self-analysis, that self-reflection, then guys, you don't belong on a political debate forum. You don't belong on Twitter talking about this stuff if the only thing that you can accept is 100%, no mercy surrender of your opponent. Because, guys, the topics that we discuss, they are far more nuanced. They're far more complex than that. There isn't just one all right stance, especially as it aligns to a party, right? It is not the case where Democrats are just always right, or Republicans are just always right on down the line. Absolutely not. And even if that were the case, there would still be individual people within both of these parties that are just imperfect, that make mistakes. Guys, this air balloon was one of them. Face it. That's just the situation. And it's not just the people in office that are saying that it was, and there are plenty of them that are in office. And keep in mind, I was ex-Navy. You're not supposed to talk out against the commander-in-chief when you're active armed forces. When you're active duty personnel, you can't do that, right? So the people that are going out of their way to say that it was wrong even being in that active duty station, that's huge. And there are hundreds and hundreds of strategists all across the globe that are like, man, I can't believe that America let Chinese operate a spy balloon over their sovereign territory with impunity. That's just nuts. You have to be able to admit that occasionally you were wrong. And that's where we're at right now. Guys, let me know what your thoughts are. I know these two issues in particular could be argued till the cows come home. But the point isn't that. The point is that eventually you've got to be able to draw a line. And the line is here. If you're talking about Trump and classified documents, the line is, if he gets convicted, then you guys will be right. You guys will absolutely be right. And I'll be like, you know what? You're right. I was wrong. Trump was not protected by his legal team. Trump's legal team did not advise him correctly. Trump did not have the legal team to use as a scapegoat. You guys are right. But if he doesn't get convicted, or if he instead calls for his legal team to fall on their swords for him, which is likely enough. I mean, they've already been sanctioned a little bit, but I think that's probably as far as it'll go. But I may be wrong, right? I could be wrong. And I'm wrong all the time, and I'm happy to admit that. Everybody else needs to be happy to admit that as well. You need to find it within yourself. You got to figure out a place where, a result happens and you're like, you know what, if that happens, I'll have to admit you were right. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you next time on Couch Talk.